Joining us on the line, ABC News correspondent Aaron Katersky, who's been on duty watching the protests there in New York City. Good morning to you, Aaron. Some 83 people were arrested last night, but there wasn't the kind of violence we saw in Ferguson.
Nothing like it. In fact, the protests were loud. They even adopted some of the Ferguson hands up, don't shoot chants, but there was no violence, no unrest, just a lot of blocked traffic. There was gridlock around Manhattan for the better part of 2-3 hours as the protesters tried first to get toward the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree lighting, that annual event that's nationally televised, and the police wouldn't let them, so they splintered off into different pockets, and they protested around the city at a number of locations throughout Manhattan, blocking traffic, causing gridlock, but doing no damage.
All right, so 83 people arrested. What was the threshold where police would move in and throw somebody under arrest?
Well, it was mainly for disorderly conduct if they tried to jump a fence or move a fence line, if they were in the street blocking traffic and refused to move after repeated commands. So there was a high threshold, and Police Commissioner Bratton was frank. He wanted to avoid mass arrests like the police department had been criticized in the past for, like after the Republican convention in 2004 here. So the goal was to, I think, give the protesters a little bit of space, not to inflame any tensions by cracking down too hard on the demonstrators, while also making sure that nothing untoward happened.
Aaron, let's turn to the grand jury's decision. We spoke yesterday on the Drive at 5, and it had really just broken. Has there been any more information with regard to what the grand jury saw evidence-wise? It's such a contrast to what we saw out of Ferguson, Missouri, where the prosecutor opened up the books and let everybody in the media see exactly the evidence.
And that's not going to happen here. The New York law just doesn't allow for it, and the prosecutor's not prepared to try and do that on his own. He has asked a judge for permission to release some details of the grand jury case, but we're not going to get that extensive record dump the way we got it in Ferguson. But we do know that the officer himself, Daniel Pantaleo, testified for more than 2 hours, and he tried, apparently successfully, to convince the grand jury that he was not administering an unauthorized chokehold, but rather a wrestling maneuver that he was taught in the police academy to take down somebody who had been resisting arrest. It was an argument tailored to fit the no-bill standard, it seemed, but one that worked successfully for him, as police officers are allowed to do things that ordinary citizens can't do, especially when someone's resisting.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that there's video there that it looks like it was a pretty intense confrontation there. But the police officers who have seen the video and who have called into this show this morning have said, no, that wasn't a chokehold. That was indeed a takedown hold, and there's a big difference.
Even the police commissioner here, though, called it a chokehold and said it was unauthorized. And it was plain for many to see, and I think that's why the grand jury decision was so stunning. You can hear on the videotape him saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. There's a knee in his back, there's an arm around his neck, and this is the videotape that so many thought would be the linchpin. Even the police department expected an indictment on some charge, if not murder or manslaughter, maybe reckless endangerment. But in the end, the no bill comes down. People go into the streets and are already talking about a mass demonstration in Washington, D.C. on December 13th.
Aaron Katersky is joining us from ABC News. And yesterday we spoke with D.C. homicide detective Rod Wheeler. He expressed surprise that there was no indictment. Earlier this morning we spoke with Dan Bongino, former Secret Service agent, but also former New York cop. He expressed surprise that there was no indictment. I think that when cops chime in on this, it's very compelling. Have there been any responses from NYPD, from spokespeople for the police officers there in New York?
No official reaction except from the union, which of course believes that the grand jury reached the right decision, and from Officer Pantaleo, who said he never intended to harm, and he said he feels very bad about the death of Eric Garner. And that was some remorse that fell on deaf ears. Garner's family said, hell no, they do not accept any kind of an apology or remorse. The time for remorse, they said, would have been when Garner was lying on the ground taking his last gasps of air.
Yeah. And also, Aaron Katersky, is there any idea of what will happen today with regard to the protests? Of course, knowing that New York City is the hometown of civil rights activist and NBC News host Al Sharpton, and he has been involved in this case. He is known for some pretty animated protests there in Gotham.
And no question, that's the reputation. So far, though, everything's been peaceful, and he's called for peaceful, constructive demonstrations. You know, Sharpton's in an interesting position now because he's sort of been brought into the fold by the mayor, Bill de Blasio.
Yeah, the New York Post refers to him as the co-mayor, do they not?
Yeah. So, you know, he's no longer, you know, part of the outside other, but he's in the fold. So I think his calls have been more muted, but strong. And today he's going to gather with leaders from the NAACP and the National Urban League, and they're going to announce plans for an economic boycott, for that mass demonstration in D.C. on the 13th. And it's going to bring the Eric Garner case into the fold of Ferguson and other cases considered to be acts of police brutality by minority communities. And you heard the president say there is a real bias that many minority communities feel in this country when it comes to law enforcement. And that's going to be part of a national conversation.
All right, so I'm just sort of curious about one thing as our time winds down here. If it gets out of control, how prepared are the cops in New York City to crack down and stop it?
Oh, they're prepared, no question. They're out in force. They have more officers in key locations. They certainly weren't going to let anybody get near the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree who didn't have a ticket. And so I think that's part of the reason why the protesters dispersed and went through the streets, causing the gridlock. But, you know, Commissioner Bratton's been very, frank, and so is the mayor, that people have a right to protest as long as it's peaceful. And so that it seems as if there's going to be a degree of tolerance despite the inconvenience for motorists.
All right, listen, Aaron Katersky, ABC News correspondent in New York, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you.